الدولية والإقليمية ذات الصلة. ففي عام 2014 أنشأت الجامعة عملية التشاور العربية الإقليمية حول الهجرة واللجوء بهدف تعزيز التعاون والحوار بين الدول الأعضاء. وكذلك أنشأت مجموعة العمل المعنية بالهجرة الدولية في المنطقة العربية عام 2013 برئاسة مشتركة بينها وبين الإسكوا والمنظمة الدولية للهجرة وبعضوية 16 وكالة من وكالات الأمم المتحدة المتخصصة من بينها المفوضية السامية للأمم المتحدة لشؤون اللاجئين. كما أنشأت أيضا اللجنة العربية الأفريقية المعنية بالهجرة عام 2013 بناء على قرار أصدرته القمة العربية الإفريقية في عام 2013. وتسعى الجامعة العربية إلى تشكيل فريق عمل معني بالهجرة الدولية بينها وبين الاتحاد الأوروبي من أجل تعزيز التعاون بين الجانبين في هذا المجال. وتعكف جامعة الدول العربية على اتخاذ الكثير من التدابير والإجراءات وإصدار القرارات على المستوى الإقليمي والتي ستساهم في دعم تنفيذ الاتفاق العالمي للاجئين. أهمها العمل مع الدول الأعضاء بالتعاون مع مفوضية شؤون اللاجئين لإعداد الاتفاقية العربية لتنظيم أوضاع اللاجئين وهي حاليا في مراحل الاعتماد. إطلاق الاستراتيجية العربية لحماية الأطفال في وضع اللجوء والنزوح بالتعاون مع مفوضية شؤون اللاجئين في نوفمبر 2019 والتي تم اعتمادها بقرار صادر عن القمة العربية التنموية في يناير 2019. اعتماد الاستراتيجية العربية بشأن إتاحة خدمات الصحة العامة في سياق اللجوء والنزوح في المنطقة العربية من قبل مجلس وزراء الصحة العرب في فبراير 2019. وتقوم الجامعة بتنظيم عدد من الزيارات الميدانية لمخيمات اللاجئين في دول الجوار السوري كان آخرها في نوفمبر 2019 للوقوف على ورصد احتياجات اللاجئين العرب في المخيمات والمجتمع المحلي وأولويات دعم الدول المستضيفة في هذا الجانب وتقديم تقارير تقييمية إلى المجالس الوزارية المتخصصة لحشد الموارد لتلبية هذه الاحتياجات. السيدات والسادة، ستقوم جامعة الدول العربية ببذل أقصى جهد لدعم الاتفاق العالمي بشأن اللاجئين والعمل مع دولها الأعضاء للمشاركة الفعالة في الاجتماعات رفيعة المستوى وفي المنتدى العالمي للاجئين الذي سيعقد على المستوى الوزاري كل 4 سنوات. وفي ختام كلمتي أجدد التزام جامعة الدول العربية مع الدول الأعضاء والمنظمات العربية الإقليمية والدولية وكافة الشركاء للعمل على تحسين أوضاع اللاجئين والنازحين في المنطقة العربية. وشكرا.
Thank you very much to the League of Arab States. I now give the floor to the Director of Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Christophe Poirel.
Thank you very much, Mr. High Commissioner. On behalf of the Council of Europe, I would like first to express my gratitude to you and to the head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, Mr. Cassis, for your invitation, and also to congratulate you on the organization of this forum. The Council of Europe, which brings together 47 European states, representing over 800 million people, and is mandated to protect and promote human rights, has long been working on and for the protection of refugees. I would like to mention in particular the action plan on protecting refugee and migrant children in Europe, which was adopted by our organization in 2017. The European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights, which oversees its implementation through its binding judgments, constitute the cornerstone of the human rights protection system in Europe. The European Court pays, I must say, particular attention to the way in which the fundamental rights and freedoms of refugees and other peoples coming to Europe are respected when they reach European soil and come under the jurisdiction of our state parties to the Convention. Beyond the European Convention of Human Rights, we have developed many other standards, and we have put in place a number of other bodies which are there also to oversee the human rights situation in our member states, including as regards refugees. But beyond those standards, we also support our member states to ensure that the human rights of all persons within their jurisdiction, including, again, refugees, are effectively protected. The most recent example is a practical handbook we've just published on alternatives to immigration detention and the work which we have recently initiated on family-based care for unaccompanied children. The effective implementation of human rights standards is an increasingly challenging task. In Europe, we see a trend towards the hardening of states' attitude regarding refugees' rights, while a security approach increasingly prevails. Time has come for enhancing multilateral cooperation, for increasing synergies, to ensure that the fundamental rights of those who had to flee their countries of origin due to wars or other reasons are respected. The significant body of human rights standards developed by our organization may provide useful elements and points of references to enhance our collective efforts in the larger international cooperation context like this forum. Our long-standing cooperation with UNHCR dates back decades and has developed in a real partnership with our joint work on the ground, with joint, in particular, awareness raising and training activities in different Council of Europe member states. It is in this spirit that the Council of Europe put forward its written comments to the Global Compact on Refugees in June 2018, and it is with the same conviction that we are ready to actively engage in the forum. And I'm pleased to announce that the Council of Europe is ready to take up the role of co-sponsor in the field of education by putting forward its European Qualification Passport for Refugees, which is helpful not only regarding education, but also for other areas where the UNHCR needs support, such as employment and livelihood. So thank you very much again, and you can count on our continued support.
Thank you very much to the Council of Europe. I now give the floor to the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. I am told that there will be two speakers, my good friend, the Undersecretary General Jamila Mahmoud, and a staff member and refugees, Karim Noureddini. The floor is to both of you in 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, or IFRC, welcomes and commends UNHCR for this very inclusive approach in organizing this forum, in particular your outreach and engagement with civil society organizations and refugees themselves. IFRC supports the participation pledge proposed by the Refugee-led Coalition, and we hope that many of you will also join. We believe that refugee voices, opinions, actions, contributions, and leadership are essential to implementation of this pledge and the Global Refugee Forum as well, and the Compact. This is why, with great pride and humility at the same time, I will hand over to my esteemed colleague Karim, who is a refugee, but also a staff member of British Red Cross, working with other refugees in his daily life, and who will speak on our behalf.
Mr. Chair, my name is Karim Noureddini, and I'm a refugee from Kosovo, now living in the UK. Growing up in Kosovo and throughout my youth, I had many dreams for my future. One thing I never dreamt was that one day I would become a refugee. When the war broke out, I was forcibly removed at gunpoint from my house and my country. I ended up in a refugee camp with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. I felt I had no identity, no nationality, no citizenship, no future, no hope. After a few weeks at the refugee camp, I was evacuated to UK under a humanitarian evacuation program. I was given a chance to rebuild my life piece by piece. I got the freedom I longed for my whole life. I was given back my dignity, my respect, and was able to access opportunities like everybody else. My hope in humanity was restored. Mr. Chair, I want to make two quick points today. My first point is about the vital role of local actors, including refugee-led and host-led organizations. The GCR recommends support to strengthen institutional capacities at local levels, including through funding and capacity development. IFRC have therefore developed a joint pledge which commits to promoting the capacities of local organizations, including refugee-led organizations. UNHCR and a number of other actors have joined this pledge. My second point is about promoting refugee participation and contribution to society. Refugees have so much to offer, and we need to recognize the vital contributions that refugees themselves can make to society. I have spent the last 20 years of my life working with refugees and asylum seekers coming to UK to make them feel safe and help them build their lives, reach their full capacity, value their talent, and make them feel equal. The significant refugee participation seen at this Global Refugee Forum this week should be seen not as a high point, but as a beginning, a baseline to improve upon. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you both. And thank you for having these two voices on your statement. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I give now the floor to the Assistant Administrator and Director of the Crisis Bureau of the United Nations Development Programme. Asad, have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. High Commissioner. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, UNDP attaches great importance to Global Compact on refugees. Displacement is a complex challenge which requires concerted effort to be conducted jointly by humanitarian, development, and peace-building actors. In the last few years, UNDP has strengthened our partnership with UNHCR through agreed global joint action plan to ensure that development and peace perspectives are integrated in refugee response plans, for instance, in situations in and around Syria, Somalia, Nigeria, and DRC Congo. Using the 2030 Agenda as our framework, UNDP is advancing sustainable development solutions for refugees and host communities in over 40 countries. We help the governments to ensure inclusion of refugees in development planning and to build pathways for solutions. Our goal is to put people at the center, national and local authorities in the driving seat, as well as to create an environment that refugees and host communities benefit equitably. In order to accelerate and scale up the implementation, UNDP commits to co-shape with partners integrated solutions in 40 countries with displacement situation in the following 3 areas. First, we will ensure tailored development, prevention, and peace-building approaches in addressing root causes of forced displacement in at least 20 countries. This entails more joined-up data and analysis, early warning, and programming supported by better financing that incentivizes much-needed collaboration across the board. Second, UNDP will strengthen refugee solutions in 20 countries through the UNDP-UNHCR rule of law and local governance partnership framework. We will step up our efforts to strengthen capacities of local governments to prepare and respond to refugee inflows, support rule of law institutions, and improve access to refugees and host communities to justice, safety, and security and human rights protection systems. Third, UNDP will promote decent work to drive forward the self-reliance of refugees. As part of the UNDP's digital transformation that is currently underway, we will work with refugees and host communities in over 20 countries to build tomorrow's skills today. In particular, UNDP will coordinate innovative digital initiatives that foster the economic inclusion of the refugees and support their self-reliance. In the coming SDGs decades of action, let's work together to reduce protracted displacement trend by half by 2030, in line with 2016 World Humanitarian Summit commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, UNDP. I now give the floor to the Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Africa of the International Labour Organization, Cynthia Samuel Olonjuwon. You have the floor.
High Commissioner, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, with refugee crisis lasting increasingly longer, it is often vital that refugees seek employment and livelihoods to provide for themselves and their families. Yet, many of the same countries that have welcomed refugees are struggling with their own economic challenges, including high unemployment. Without proper support to host communities and refugees, the labor market repercussions can be far-reaching for all workers, but ultimately on peace and social cohesion. The challenges posed by forced displacement cannot be left to host countries alone. The international community can provide much-needed help by equipping those at the forefront of crisis response with the means to improve the lives and working conditions of national workers, refugees, and other displaced by violence, natural disaster, and climate change, giving particular attention to women as agents of change. ILO is fully committed to playing its role. We pledge to intensify our cooperation with sister UN agencies and to scale up our technical support to governments, employers and workers' organizations, and other partners to facilitate decent work opportunities for all workers affected by crisis. As we celebrate our centenary, we're committed to accelerating our partnerships and efforts within the Horn of Africa, Sahel, Middle East, and Latin America to assist governments in adopting the most effective labor market policies and interventions, those that can deliver improved workplace rights and protections, skills development, enabling environments for entrepreneurship and business growth, data and institutional services, and equitable access to social protection. And as a tripartite organization, we will help to foster social dialogue in these processes so as to ensure lasting and durable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ILO. I now give the floor to the Director of the Humanitarian Division of UNFPA, Shoko Arakai.
Thank you, Mr. High Commissioner, Excellency, distinguished colleagues and partners. Last month in Nairobi at the ICPD 25 Summit, more than 8,000 people gathered to advance sexual and reproductive health and rights. The event was overwhelmingly filled with energy and an engagement with hope. We gather here to advance today the hope for refugees. For the coming period, United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, commits first to improve access to safe, quality, and dignified menstrual hygiene management for refugees and host communities. UNHCR and UNFPA are making a joint pledge to improve quality and coordinated intersectoral menstrual hygiene management programming. Second, UNFPA will increase the coverage and quality of clinical management of rape and intimate partner violence to enhance protection and response for gender-based violence in refugee context. UNFPA will also strengthen cash-based programming that facilitate access to sexual and reproductive health services and gender-based violence response. Furthermore, UNFPA will ensure rollout of new interagency minimum standard for gender-based violence, which entail strengthening the capacity of national partners, including local women's organizations. Third, UNFPA will improve the collection, analysis, dissemination, and usage of population data in support of refugee and internally displaced populations. Fourth, UNFPA commits organizationally and jointly with members of the Compact for Youth, Young People in Humanitarian Action to ensure systematic use of age disaggregated data and programming on the ground is developed with and for young people. Finally, UNFPA commits to scaling up mental health and psychosocial support in humanitarian response and refugee context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, UNFPA. I now give the floor to Xavier De Victor of the World Bank.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the World Bank Group, I would like to thank UNHCR for the organization of this first Global Refugee Forum. I would also like to reiterate our appreciation for host countries and for the generosity they are demonstrating every day. The last 3 days have been an important moment as we see the agenda further shift towards comprehensive approaches that cover protection, humanitarian and development needs. Further shift towards enhanced focus on both host communities and refugees. Further shift also toward greater government leadership within the context of international solidarity and responsibility sharing, and to a focus on policy reforms and institutions. Further shifts towards whole-of-society approaches that are informed by data and evidence. And further shifts towards broadening the base of support, and in particular towards mobilizing private sector engagement, and to seeing refugees as actors of their own recovery, not only as victims. And then finally, further shift towards increased engagement by development actors in prevention and in countries of origin, as the Prime Minister of Somalia called for. As our Managing Director expressed yesterday, we at the World Bank Group are committed to play our role in this endeavor, including, but not only, through the recently approved IDA-19 financing package. And we are very grateful to UNHCR for the partnership we have developed over the last years to benefit from their experience and to ensure that protection and development can go hand in hand. I would like to close by referring to the words of Aya, the refugee who addressed us on the first day of this Global Refugee Forum. This is about people. This is about people in distress, and it is about how best to support them. So let us remember our words, and our call for all of us to be the agents of the change we would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the World Bank. Next are some brief remarks by Victoria Nyoka Thomas of Oxfam. You have the floor.
Good evening. My name is Victoria Nyoka, a South Sudanese refugee living in Uganda. I am happy to be here with Oxfam, representing refugee-led organization. I graduated in 2015 and I got a job. One morning, my mother and I saw a live small and big bullets. It was something I had never seen. The next day, we fled to Uganda, and I was a refugee in another country. That could have happened to anyone here. If a developing country like Uganda can generously host over 1 million refugees, I call upon other wealthy countries to step up and take more meaningful actions by 1. Welcoming refugees when they arrive at your borders. Put in place systems that protect universal right to seek asylum. 2, supporting refugee hosting countries with long-term funding so that countries like Uganda can continue to respond to the needs of both refugees and host communities. And the most importantly, I call upon other wealthy countries to resettle at least 10% of the refugees registered with the UNHCR, as resettlement is at the heart of responsibility sharing. Oxfam is pledging to work with the refugee and host communities to ensure they have a seat at the table. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Oxfam, for this important statement. I now give the floor to Juan de Gouveia of the International Disability Alliance. If the speaker is not available, I'll give... Oh, I'm sorry.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm a deaf person. I'm from Venezuela. The International Disability Alliance urges all participants to the forum to commit to the full inclusion and active involvement of refugees with disabilities in all stages of the refugee response. Persons with disabilities are disproportionately affected in larger scale and protect displaced situation. They are heightened at risk of violence, exploitation, and abuse, and face multiple and intersectional discrimination, and in particular underrepresented groups such as persons with intellectual and psychological disabilities. Refugee women and girls, children, older persons, and indigenous people with disability face compounding barriers to access protection and assistance. The lack of disaggregated data makes refugees with disabilities invisible at reception and its assessment procedures, excluding them from basic services, education, and opportunities for self-reliance. Stigma and lack of awareness further isolate them, and the lack of accessible information, infrastructure, and services perpetuates this exclusion. Durable and equitable solution must be inclusive of all refugees, whatever and however they are. This is the only way to reach the goal of the 2030 Agenda. Such solutions require support to the meaningful participation and active involvement of refugees with disabilities and participation and active involvement of refugees with disabilities and their representative organization, recognizing the leadership role of refugees with disabilities in decision-making and their capacity as actors in the refugee response is the key accountability, and to ensure that all related processes are inclusive, accessible, and transparent. Therefore, IDA calls for all actions to be in line with the principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Person with Disabilities, in particular of the provision of Article 11 to promote the participation of refugees with disabilities, including the most marginalized groups and those from the Global South. IDA also calls to all actors of the refugee response to implement the International Accounting Standards Committee guidelines on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian action in refugee context, to make sure their responses to the movements of the refugees do not perpetrate exclusion and segregation. Finally, the implementation of the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy is key to promote participation of persons with disabilities. This will lead to much needed attitudinal and transformative change, recognizing that disability inclusion is not just a mere add-on, but is central to achieve the promise of leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry about my impatience at the beginning, and you are actually a fantastic time manager. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Imad Madanat of the Adventist Development and Relief Agency for some brief remarks.
Good evening, Mr. High Commissioner, distinguished delegates, all protocol observed. Thank you for inviting ADRA to this forum and for your great hospitality. The Adventist Development and Relief Agency, ADRA, has impacted and improved the lives of 16.3 million people around the world in 2018. That number includes women, children, and men in more than 118 countries in an integrated approach, including health, WASH, livelihoods, and education. Our work connects with refugees and IDPs in many of these countries. ADRA is committed to a holistic approach and a comprehensive response as the answer to the refugee crisis. As a faith-based organization and a global community of 20 million Adventists, we want to be trusted partners with governments, host communities, and more important, to be trusted by the refugees themselves as they rebuild their lives and continue a journey of self-reliance. Towards that goal, we're making the two commitments. First, in October 14, 2019, ADRA, as the official international humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and recognizing that the Adventist Church has the second largest Protestant school system in the world, we partnered with the global church body to announce a new global campaign for education. We call it Every Child Everywhere in School. The joint campaign is an urgent call to leaders around the world that all children, regardless of race, age, nationality, gender, or religion, have the right to earn and complete education, and that being in school is a recognition of the value and potential of each individual child. One of the key motivators of the campaign is that we do not accept that the refugee children are 5 times more likely to be out of school than their non-refugee peers. Second commitment is for the refugee crisis in Latin America. Never before has Latin America suffered a social and economic crisis of this magnitude, a crisis that continues to disrupt the lives of millions of people across the region. A holistic approach is a priority for ADRA's work and refugee and host communities, especially when it comes to addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, such as women, children, and people with special needs. It is for those vulnerable populations that ADRA remains committed to play a key role in implementing the Global Compact on Refugees, and especially in addressing the Latin America crisis next year. As a result, ADRA has committed $1 million of emergency private funding to the response in Latin America. This will be used as to complement the addition to the public funding we receive, so that we don't have any gap in our intervention. Thank you for your support, and we wish you a Happy New Year.
And we do the same. Thank you very much. And I now give the floor to the last speaker of all the speaking list, Gulet Mire of Third Culture Minds.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Jumbo, assalamu alaikum and kia ora koutou. Distinguished guests, NGOs, and fellow refugee representatives, it's an honor to give the final intervention from the floor for the first ever Global Refugee Forum on behalf of Third Culture Minds, a New Zealand-based NGO dedicated to advancing positive mental health and well-being outcomes for refugee youth. More recently, our work has expanded to focus on advocacy to ensure that refugee voices and perspectives are taken into account through policy, program, and service delivery. I'm particularly heartened to see so many speaking on and acknowledging the importance of including refugees and others with lived experiences. My hope is that these conversations instigate some much-needed continued progress in this area. I'd like to further use this opportunity to echo the voices of our refugee delegates and to call on all the relevant actors to reflect on how they can include refugees and people with lived experiences to encourage genuine and meaningful participation. Finally, in a world where we're witnessing doors being closed on refugees and vulnerable people more than ever before, Third Culture Minds remains committed to playing its part in making the UNHCR resettlement strategy a reality for all. In this regard, we commit to pledging to ensure that all actors, including New Zealand, undertake and introduce further bold and new measures to increase resettlement quotas in areas of greatest needs, as identified by the UNHCR, and more specifically, the Africa and the Middle East regions. 2, to enhance and implement permanent complementary pathways to resettlement, including a permanent community sponsorship initiative. And finally, to introduce initiatives aimed at enhancing a more welcoming and inclusive society in order to foster social cohesion, as this is an important mechanism for creating a much more peaceful society. Thank you all for your time.
So thank you, Gulet. And this concludes the long list of 135 speakers. So thank you all. And I apologize for those that we could not accommodate because it was simply becoming too late. We are coming to a close, to a wrap-up of this first ever Global Refugee Forum, and I would like to ask my podium companion, Manuel Bessler, on behalf of the co-host Switzerland, to share with us some final remarks. Manuel, the floor is yours.
High Commissioner, thank you very much, High Commissioner, and thank you very much to all of you. We have 7:30, last day of the conference, and you are still here. That shows stamina, that shows commitment and endurance. Very much appreciated. Switzerland was proud to be the co-host, proud to be together with you, High Commissioner, co-host of this first forum, which we see very much as a milestone in advancing international humanitarian refugee regime. I want to thank you, High Commissioner, for your leadership, but I want also to thank you, your staff, HCR staff. I want to thank particularly Danielle Anders, and also the staff of the Secretariat to still be around here, the interpreters who help us up to the last minute to go through all these important speeches of 135 committed people who wanted to raise their voices. We heard a lot of voices, some of them not heard or seldom heard, particularly the young. We heard the voices of these people with disabilities. Very much appreciated this commitment. And we look very much forward to continue on this road. I think we are on the right track. We heard a lot of pledges, a lot of contribution, over 700 pledges apparently. That means a lot of homework to be done. To do pledges, to present pledges here is relatively easy. But we will come back to this forum, and we want to see the progress that all of us have done on these pledges. In this regard, a lot still needs to be done. This was a first important benchmark on this road. Switzerland looks very much forward to continue this journey with all of you, because as we saw, nobody can do this alone. We need collective and coordinated action. We were very happy to welcome you here in Geneva, and we look forward to see you very soon, be it in this forum or in other gatherings, but for the cause of leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuel, and thank you all. Let me now conclude myself the proceedings with some remarks that certainly will not do justice to the incredible diversity, richness, energy, ideas that have been produced in the last 3 days, thanks to all of you present here and those that are not present here but that have participated in the Global Refugee Forum. I'll give you a bit of numbers because I think they're always helpful to understand. There were, besides this big plenary session that kept running for the last 2 days, since Monday we've been managing about 100 other points of different type of interaction and events, marrying, as you have seen here, the very formal and institutional with the highly informal, innovative, and creative. And I think that in this mix of the formal and informal, this meeting, this forum has distinguished itself. This is the way we certainly wanted it to be, and in that respect, I think it has been successful. we have counted about 3,000 participants. We're not too bad in counting people, and sometimes we do make mistakes, but I think 3,000 participants is a very number of participants, and many of the delegations, to go back to states, were led, dozens of them were led at very senior level, at ministerial level, which was the encouragement that we gave to all governments. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank all the permanent missions here in Geneva that have relentlessly bombarded their capitals to ensure that senior representations would be coming. Thank you to all, and especially to those that have succeeded in doing so. But among the participants, that were also at least 100 companies and foundations, and 200 or more than 200 civil society organizations. And these participants, broadly from civil society, including the business community, have really been among the most creative, the contributors to the most energetic part of the forum, and I want to thank them, as I want to thank those representatives of academia and the sports that also contributed very much. I was pleased that we could launch, that the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection could launch the academic network on Monday, among one of the initiatives started here and foreseen in the Global Compact. I would be remiss, of course, if I did not mention the pivotal role of the refugees. We had refugees here, and many participated as speakers, as panel members, and in many other events. We had refugees from originating from 22 different countries and hosted by 30 countries. This is quite significant. And I think I want to go back to the word that Aya Abdallah, the refugee or former refugee who spoke in the opening session, shared with all of us. She told us, I quote, "Believe in us, invest in us, and you will see we will all be stronger for it." And I think these were among the most significant words that were pronounced in this forum. And I want to also thank delegations who included refugees. This is all part of the invitation that we just heard from Oxfam: keep refugees at the center as we discuss matters that relate to their lives and to their futures. There were many questions asked. Why are we here? What does all of this represent? What will it mean on the ground? Allow me here a brief, very personal reflections. I became High Commissioner at the beginning of 2016. I remember that a few days before I became High Commissioner, I was already designated as such, but a few days before I was still at home, and I got a phone call from the then Deputy Secretary General, Jan Eliasson. And Jan told me, Filippo, we have decided that the Secretary General wants to have a summit at the General Assembly on refugees and migrants. So since you'll be the High Commissioner during that time, we want you to know, and we want you to know that we will work together on that. That was at the peak of the arrivals of large numbers of refugees and migrants in Europe. And I remember that I then came to Geneva, we started discussing them, and even among ourselves there was a bit of, not skepticism, but questions. What will a summit do? What will a summit change in our responses? And then the summit came. And the Leaders' Summit that was organized in the margins of that. And many pledges were made back then. And the summit urged the United Nations to establish 2 compacts. And again, we said, that's good, that's a progress, but many voices rose and said, why a compact? What's a compact going to, what difference will a compact make? and then we work. We actually, in the Refugee Compact, we established the comprehensive refugee framework, which made a lot of differences. You heard the Commissioner of International Partnership speak about Kakuma. Kakuma, what we're doing in Kakuma, led by the Kenyan government, is the child of the New York Declaration and of the Refugee Compact, is an advance of how this should be. And so the Compact and the preparation of the Compact gave us space. But when the Compact was endorsed exactly a year ago, I think to the day or this week, I heard many voices, we heard many voices legitimately say, well, this is another United Nations instrument. And what will be the compact about? We have to implement the compact. So we said, okay, in the first year of the compact, while we implement it, we will also prepare a global refugee forum to come all together and to make pledges for the implementation of the compact. Now, this has happened. We are at that point. As Manuel said, there were more than 700. In fact, 770 pledges. I already hear many voices tomorrow morning telling me, but you know, unless we see the implementation of these pledges, we will have failed. Very good. There's always people that are a bit pessimist. That's fine. They keep us on our toes. But I think that we have to believe in this process. And the fact that we have come here, so many of us from so many different institutions, governments, organizations, parts of civil society, is a testimony that it is possible to proceed in this direction. For those of you who want to have facts, and that's a very good question, we are still carrying an analysis of the compacts. And the co-convener summary will be posted online later tonight, together with the first analysis of the compact. Let me single out, however, because I'm very grateful to the World Bank that has been such a leader in this whole endeavor, for their 2.2 billion pledge for the next refugee window under IDA 19, and I understand that this will be matched by other substantive, very substantive amount of money, in the billions, if I may say that, which will be devoted to boost the involvement of the private sector and create jobs in refugee situations. And the link that we have with other funds of the World Bank in fragile states, as the Prime Minister of Somalia noted, this will be very, very important. You know, this is still very rough, so don't maybe use it yet in your tweets, but if you want to use it, why not? Our estimate is that pledges made by states and other stakeholders in terms of financial support, new pledges amount to more than 3 billion. But of course, pledges are not just financial. I think it is very significant that more than 1/3 of the pledges, 270, came from countries in the Global South. And I want to pay tribute to the courage and the sense of responsibility of those countries that made those pledges in terms of refugee protection, access to asylum, inclusion in national development plans, legislation, policies. We heard many of them. It takes a lot of courage, and as many of them reminded us, this now needs to be matched by donor pledges in order to sustain and support those efforts. The new Asylum Capacity Support Group will be also devoted to help countries restore the primacy and the integrity, as the Secretary General said yesterday, of the asylum system. And at the other end of the spectrum, I want to salute efforts